Miami, July 1975. The Florida sun beat down mercilessly as demolition crews swarmed the once grand Palm View Hotel. Built in 1928, the aging structure had withstood hurricanes and hosted celebrities, but could not survive the city's relentless push toward modernization. For Jack Harmon, the 42-year-old foreman overseeing the demolition, it was just another job until his crew made an unsettling discovery beneath the ornate marble floor of the lobby.
Checked.
"You need to see this," called Diego, one of his most experienced workers, his voice echoing strangely in the half-demolished space. Jack wiped sweat from his brow and navigated through the rubble. The crew had broken through the lobby floor, expecting to find simple foundation materials. Instead, they uncovered what appeared to be a false subfloor concealing a cramped space barely 3 feet high. Diego's flashlight beam revealed something glinting in the darkness. "What the hell?" Jack muttered, crouching to get a better look. The beam illuminated a row of vintage suitcases, 7 of them, meticulously arranged and secured to the floor with heavy, rusted chains. Each case was padlocked, the leather coverings faded and cracked with age. "Should we call the police?" Diego asked, his normally steady voice betraying a hint of unease. Jack hesitated. Construction delays meant money lost, and getting authorities involved would certainly halt progress. But something about those chained cases made his skin crawl. "Yeah," he finally said, "call them, and tell everyone to stay back." Word spread quickly among the crew, and by noon, detectives from the Miami PD had cordoned off the area. Detective Raymond Wells, a weathered man with sharp eyes that had seen 20 years of Miami's darkest corners, took charge of the scene. "How long has this hotel been here?" Wells asked, examining the chains without touching them. "Since 28, Jack replied. "Almost 50 years, and no renovations to the lobby floor in that time." Jack shook his head. "According to the blueprints, no. Whatever's down there has been there a long time." Wells nodded grimly. "We'll need to document everything before we move these. Could take a couple of days." "Days?" Jack protested. "We're already behind schedule." "Mr. Harmon," Wells said quietly, "those chains weren't put there to keep the suitcases from getting out. They were put there to keep people from getting in. Something tells me we're going to want to be careful with this one." As the police photographer captured the scene from every angle, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel was watching them. A ridiculous thought. The building was half demolished, walls exposed to open air, windows shattered. Yet something felt present, observant, waiting. That night at home with his wife Linda, Jack found himself unable to talk about what they'd found. He brushed off her questions about his unusually quiet mood and blamed it on fatigue. In bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind filled with images of those chained suitcases waiting silently in the darkness beneath a floor where thousands of people had walked, completely unaware, for nearly half a century. The phone rang at 5:17 a.m., jolting him from a troubled sleep. It was Wells. "We've opened the first suitcase," the detective said without preamble. His voice sounded different, strained. "I think you should come down here." "Why?" Jack asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. "Because," Wells replied after a pause, "you found them. And sometimes when you find something, it finds you back." The early morning air felt unusually cold for July in Miami as Jack pulled into the hotel's parking lot. Police vehicles surrounded the building, their red and blue lights painting eerie patterns across the half-demolished structure. Crime scene tape fluttered in the pre-dawn breeze. Detective Wells met him at the entrance, cigarette dangling from his lips, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Without speaking, he led Jack through the lobby to where a makeshift examination area had been set up. The first suitcase lay open on a folding table, surrounded by investigators in gloves. "Prepare yourself," Wells warned, his voice low. Jack approached slowly. The suitcase was lined with what appeared to be newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle with age. But what caught Jack's attention was the collection of black and white photographs carefully arranged inside. Along with a leather-bound journal and what appeared to be personal effects, a woman's compact mirror, a silver cigarette case, a string of pearls. "What am I looking at?" Jack asked, confused. Wells handed him one of the photographs. It showed the hotel in its prime, with well-dressed guests mingling in the very lobby where they now stood. Jack recognized the ornate columns and distinctive chandelier, though in the photo they were pristine, not covered in demolition dust. "Look at the date," Wells instructed. The photo was labeled Opening Gala, September 1928. Nothing unusual there. "Now look at this one." Wells handed him another photograph, similar to the first. This one showed a young woman in elegant 1920s attire standing in the lobby. She was beautiful, with dark hair styled in a fashionable bob, smiling confidently at the camera. The date on this one read September 1928 as well. "I don't understand," Jack admitted. Wells sighed heavily. "This is Catherine Blackwood." She was 22 years old in 1928, daughter of a Boston banking family. She checked into this hotel on September 18, 1928. She was never seen again. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. And this is her suitcase? No, Wells said grimly. This suitcase belongs to whoever took her. He directed Jack's attention to the journal. Wearing gloves, Wells carefully opened it to a marked page. The handwriting was neat, methodical, almost scholarly in its precision. Listen to this, Wells said, reading aloud. Miss Blackwood proved disappointingly ordinary in her fear. I had expected more resistance from a woman of her breeding. Perhaps the next one will provide a more satisfying challenge. Jack felt his stomach turn. There's 6 more suitcases down there. Wells nodded grimly. And we've found records of at least 6 more missing persons who were last seen at this hotel between 1928 and 1932. All young women from wealthy families. The implications hung heavy in the air. Jack looked back toward the open floor where the remaining chained suitcases waited. What's in them? We don't know yet. But based on this one, Wells let the sentence hang unfinished. A forensic technician approached, holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside was what appeared to be a hotel staff ID badge, corroded with age but still legible. The photo showed a handsome young man in a bellhop uniform, his eyes intense even in the faded image. We found this at the bottom of the suitcase, the technician explained. The name is Martin Grady, Jack interrupted, suddenly feeling lightheaded. Wells and the technician stared at him. How did you know that? Wells demanded. Jack's mouth went dry. Because the current owner of the hotel, the man who hired my company for the demolition, his name is Edward Grady. He told me his grandfather used to work here as a bellhop before eventually buying the place in the 1940s. Wells' expression darkened. Get Edward Grady on the phone. Now. As one of the officers rushed to make the call, Jack couldn't tear his eyes away from the photograph of the bellhop. There was something in Martin Grady's eyes that seemed to look back at him across nearly 50 years, something knowing, patient, and deeply, terribly amused. Edward Grady's corner office on the 20th floor of the Grady Real Estate Building offered a commanding view of Miami's skyline. At 73, he remained an imposing figure, tall, trim, with a full head of silver hair and the confident posture of a man accustomed to power. When Detective Wells and Jack entered, he greeted them with practiced charm. Gentlemen, Grady said, rising from behind his mahogany desk. I understand you've found something interesting at my old hotel. Wells didn't bother with pleasantries. Mr. Grady, are you familiar with a Martin Grady who worked at the Palm View Hotel in the late 1920s? Something flickered in the old man's eyes, so briefly Jack almost missed it. Of course, my grandfather. He started as a bellhop and worked his way up. Eventually purchased the hotel after World War II, a true American success story. Wells placed a photograph on the desk, the staff ID they had found in the suitcase. This was discovered beneath the hotel lobby along with evidence suggesting your grandfather may have been involved in the disappearance of several young women. Grady's expression didn't change, but Jack noticed his hands, liver spotted but still strong, gripping the edge of his desk slightly tighter. Detective, my grandfather was a respected businessman who built this company from nothing. These accusations are absurd. We haven't made any accusations yet, Wells noted. But we have 6 more suitcases to open, and I suspect we'll find evidence connecting your grandfather to at least 6 more disappearances, Grady leaned back in his chair, his composure perfect except for a slight tremor in his right hand, which he quickly concealed by placing it in his lap. Even if these items were somehow connected to my grandfather, which I doubt, we're discussing events from nearly 50 years ago. Martin has been dead for 20 years. What exactly do you hope to accomplish? Justice has no expiration date, Mr. Grady, Wells replied. And I find it interesting that you scheduled this building for demolition so suddenly. The Historical Society was fighting to have it preserved. Then overnight you pushed through the permits and had crews working within a week. Business decision, Grady shrugged. The property is more valuable than the building. Jack spoke up. Mr. Grady, when you hired my company, you specifically instructed us to demolish the lobby floor intact and remove it in large sections rather than breaking it up on site. You said it was for historical preservation. Grady's eyes hardened as he looked at Jack. I don't recall giving such specific instructions to a contractor. I have it in writing, Jack replied. Your signature. The room fell silent. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Miami bustled 20 stories below, oblivious to the tension in the office. Gentlemen, Grady finally said, his voice steady, I'm an old man. Whatever you think my grandfather may or may not have done occurred before I was born. Fail to see how this concerns me. Wells leaned forward. Mr. Grady, did you know those suitcases were there? Of course not, Grady scoffed. How could I possibly? Your father took over the hotel from your grandfather, Wells interrupted. Did he ever mention anything unusual about the lobby? Any areas that were off limits for renovations? A muscle twitched in Grady's jaw. Detective, this conversation is over. If you have actual charges to file, contact my attorney. Otherwise, I have a business to run. As they left the building, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they'd awakened something dormant. He knew, Jack said as they reached the car. He was trying to get rid of the evidence. Wells nodded grimly, and he nearly succeeded. If your crew had followed his instructions to remove the floor intact, those suitcases might never have been discovered. He glanced at Jack. Why didn't you, by the way? Follow his instructions. Jack shrugged. Cost. Breaking up the floor on site is standard procedure. Removing it intact would have required specialized equipment, added days to the schedule. I figured he wouldn't notice the difference once it was gone. Wells smiled slightly. Sometimes cutting corners saves lives. His expression turned serious again. Let's get back to the hotel. I want to see what's in those other suitcases. Neither man noticed the black sedan that pulled away from the curb behind them, following at a careful distance through the midday Miami traffic. The second suitcase contained items similar to the first: photographs, newspaper clippings, and personal effects belonging to another missing woman, along with another journal written in the same meticulous handwriting. The third and fourth suitcases followed the same pattern. By late afternoon, the investigative team had established a clear modus operandi: young, wealthy women traveling alone, who had checked into the hotel and subsequently vanished. He was methodical, the forensic psychologist explained to Wells and Jack as they examined the contents. Each journal documents his process, how he selected them, gained their trust, and eventually ... double quotes, she trailed off, not needing to complete the grim thought. Jack had been reading through one of the journals, feeling increasingly disturbed by the calm, almost academic tone the writer used to describe his crimes. Listen to this, Jack said. The lobby floor provides the perfect concealment. The hotel's original blueprints, which I have modified, show solid concrete where I have created this chamber. Should renovation ever be necessary, the modified plans will ensure this area remains undisturbed. Wells looked up sharply. He planned for the long term. He didn't just want to hide his crimes. He wanted to preserve them. Like trophies, the psychologist agreed, for someone to find eventually. These weren't just killings, they were his life's work, his legacy. Jack felt a chill run through him. So Edward Grady knew. He must have found the real blueprints, or his father told him, and when the historical preservation became an issue, he had to move quickly to destroy the evidence, Wells added. I'm getting a warrant for his home and office. There might be more we don't know about. As the fifth and sixth suitcases were processed, a disturbing pattern emerged in the journals. Martin Grady's writings became increasingly erratic, revealing a man who believed he was creating art through murder. The final entries suggested he had begun to worry about discovery, paranoid that hotel guests could somehow sense what lay beneath their feet. The seventh suitcase, however, was different. Smaller than the others and made of distinctive red leather. It contained no victim's belongings, only a single leather-bound volume larger than the previous journals. When Wells carefully opened it, they found not the documentation of another crime, but what appeared to be Martin Grady's personal diary. October 3, 1932, Wells read aloud. They suspect, not the authorities, they are, as always, blind to what happens before their very eyes, but the hotel itself. I feel it watching me. The guests sense something too. I see it in their eyes when they cross the lobby. They hurry without knowing why. The floor speaks to them in ways they cannot consciously hear. Jack felt goosebumps rising on his arms despite the heat. December 12, 1932, Wells continued. I have made a decision. The work must be preserved, but my time here must end. I have created a sanctuary for them beneath the floor, where they will remain undisturbed until someone worthy discovers them. Someone who will understand. I have modified the blueprints one final time. The lobby floor will remain untouched for decades. By then I will be gone, but they will remain waiting. And if my son or his son should ever need to protect them, I have left instructions. Wells closed the journal, his expression grim. The son would be Edward Grady's father. He passed the secret down through the family. Jack stared at the open floor, at the space where the suitcases had been chained. But why keep it? Why not destroy everything years ago? Because, the psychologist said quietly, Martin Grady believed he was creating art, and so did his son and his grandson after him. They protected his work like a family would protect a priceless heirloom. Jack suddenly remembered something, a detail from his initial meeting with Edward Grady months ago, when they discussed the demolition. Grady had insisted on keeping the original lobby chandelier, claiming it had sentimental value. At the time, Jack had thought nothing of it. The chandelier, Jack said abruptly. Grady was adamant about preserving the lobby chandelier. Wells frowned. What about it? It's in his office, hanging right above his desk. Jack felt sick as the realization hit him. In every one of the photographs of the victims, that chandelier is visible. He kept it as a trophy. Wells was already on the radio calling for additional officers to meet them at Grady's office. As they rushed to their car, Jack's phone rang, a call from the demolition site. One of his workers was calling with an urgent update. "Jack, you need to get back here now," Diego said, his voice tense. "The old man, Grady, he's here with some private security guys. They're trying to access the site, saying they need to retrieve personal property before demolition continues." "Don't let him in," Jack ordered. "We're on our way." As they sped toward the hotel, Wells radioed ahead for backup. "Grady's making his move," the detective said grimly. "He's trying to clean up the evidence we haven't processed yet." Jack gripped the dashboard as Wells took a corner too fast. "There's something we're still missing. The journals document 7 victims, but we only found evidence for 6 in the suitcases." Wells glanced at him. What are you saying?" "The last entry was from December 1932. Martin Grady wrote that he had to leave, that his time was ending. What if there was one final victim? What if it was Martin Grady himself?" As their car screeched to a halt outside the Palmview Hotel, Jack and Detective Wells found the scene in chaos. 2 private security guards in suits were arguing with the police officers who had been stationed at the entrance. Behind them stood Edward Grady, his normally composed demeanor replaced by barely contained fury. "This is my property," Grady was shouting at a young officer. "I have every right to enter." Wells approached swiftly, badge in hand. "Mr. Grady, this is now an active crime scene. You're not permitted to enter." Grady's eyes narrowed when he saw them. "Detective, back so soon? I've already called the police commissioner. This harassment will end today." "Your grandfather murdered at least 6 women, Mr. Grady," Wells said quietly. "And you've been concealing evidence for years. The commissioner won't be able to help you." For a moment, Grady's mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Then his composure returned. "Baseless accusations. My attorneys will have a field day with this." Before Wells could respond, a shout came from inside the building. Everyone turned to see one of the forensic technicians running toward them, face pale. "Detective, we found something else under the floor." Wells turned to the officers. "Keep Mr. Grady here. If he tries to leave, arrest him." Inside, the technician led them back to the open floor section. The space beneath had been fully illuminated with work lights, revealing that it extended further than they had initially realized. "We thought we'd cleared everything," the technician explained. "But one of our guys noticed a discoloration on the wall at the back. It's another compartment. In the far corner of the hidden space, barely visible, was a seam in the concrete wall. The forensic team had already begun carefully removing the false section, revealing a small alcove behind it. Jack felt his heart pounding as they approached the opening. Inside, they found not another suitcase, but a simple wooden box about 3 feet long. "Careful," Wells cautioned as technicians photographed and then slowly lifted the box out. When they opened it, Jack had to turn away for a moment. Inside were human remains. A skeleton carefully arranged, the bones darkened with age. "Looks like you were right," Wells said grimly. "The 7th victim might have been Martin Grady himself." The skull stared up at them with empty eye sockets, but what caught everyone's attention was the object clutched in the skeletal hands, a small red key. "That matches the lock on the red suitcase," one of the technicians noted. Wells carefully extracted the key using tweezers, placing it in an evidence bag. "Let's see what Martin Grady locked away that was so important he took the key to his grave." Back in the makeshift evidence area, Wells used the key to open a small locked compartment in the red suitcase they hadn't been able to access before. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age. When Wells carefully opened it, he removed a letter written in the now familiar handwriting of Martin Grady, along with what appeared to be a photograph. "To whoever finds us," Wells read aloud, "if you are reading this, you have discovered my greatest work. The women are merely components, the foundation, you might say. I am the final piece, the artist who becomes part of his creation." Wells paused, looking disturbed, then continued, "But my work will not end with my death. I have ensured it will continue through my bloodline. My son understands the importance of preservation, and his son will learn, and his son after him. We will always be connected to this place, to what lies beneath the floor. The hotel may change hands, may even be destroyed one day, but we will endure. We are in the very foundation now." Wells turned the photograph around so Jack could see it. It showed a much younger Edward Grady, perhaps 30 years old, standing in the hotel lobby with his father, both men smiling beneath the ornate chandelier that now hung in Edward's office. "Jesus," Jack whispered. "They knew. All of them. Wells nodded grimly. And they protected it for decades. A family legacy of murder. A commotion from outside interrupted them. Raised voices, then the sound of a gunshot. Wells and Jack rushed out to find one of the police officers down, clutching his shoulder. Edward Grady and his security guards were gone. He had a gun. The wounded officer gasped as a colleague applied pressure to his bleeding shoulder. When you didn't come back out, he said he wouldn't let you destroy his family's legacy. Wells immediately radioed for backup and an ambulance. Which way did they go? Inside, the officer replied through gritted teeth. Said there was something he needed to retrieve. Jack felt a chill of realization. The chandelier. It's still hanging in the main lobby. Wells drew his weapon. Stay here, he ordered Jack. No way, Jack replied, already moving toward the entrance. I know this building better than anyone. Half the floors are missing. One wrong step and you could fall 20 feet. Wells hesitated, then nodded sharply. Stay behind me. They entered the dimly lit hotel cautiously. Most of the power had been cut for demolition, with only emergency lighting still functioning. The once grand lobby was now a shell of crumbling marble and exposed beams, with the floor partially opened where they discovered the suitcases. And standing beneath the still hanging chandelier was Edward Grady, alone. Where are your security guards, Edward? Wells called, his gun trained on the elderly man. Grady smiled thinly. Gone. I paid them well to get me inside, but not well enough to risk prison. It's over, Wells said. We know everything. Your grandfather's crimes, your father's complicity, your efforts to conceal it all. Grady shook his head slowly, his eyes moving to the open section of floor. You don't understand anything. This isn't about crime. It's about transcendence. He gestured toward the chandelier above him. My grandfather created something eternal here. Those women, himself, all of them became part of something greater. They became murder victims, Wells said flatly. No, Grady insisted, an unsettling fervor in his eyes. They became foundation, the beginning of a dynasty. He looked at Jack suddenly. You felt it, didn't you, when you first found them? The power in this place? Jack said nothing, but he remembered the strange feeling he'd had that first day, as if the building were somehow watching them. Put your hands up, Mr. Grady, Wells ordered. You're under arrest. Grady laughed, a hollow sound in the decaying lobby. Detective, I'm 73 years old. I've lived my entire life knowing what was beneath this floor, feeling my grandfather's presence guiding our family to success. He reached up toward the chandelier. Do you really think I fear prison? Before Wells could respond, Grady grasped one of the chandelier's support chains and yanked hard. The decades-old mounting gave way immediately. Wells fired, but it was too late. The massive chandelier crashed down, striking Grady and sending him plummeting through the open section of floor into the darkness below. The sound of breaking glass and Grady's abrupt scream echoed through the lobby, then silence. Jesus Christ, Wells breathed, holstering his weapon and rushing toward the opening. Jack was close behind him, heart hammering in his chest. They peered down into the darkness. The chandelier had crashed through the opening, dragging Grady with it into the hidden chamber below. In the dim emergency lighting, they could make out Grady's motionless form amid the twisted metal and shattered crystal. We need to get down there, Wells said, already looking for a way to descend safely. Jack spotted the construction ladder they'd been using earlier. Together they positioned it and carefully climbed down into the chamber. Grady lay crushed beneath the chandelier, blood pooling around him on the concrete floor. Incredibly, he was still alive, his breathing shallow and labored. Ambulance is already on the way for the officer, Wells said, kneeling beside the injured man. Hold on, Grady. Grady's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then settling on Jack. A smile spread across his bloodied face. You see now, he whispered, full circle. Began beneath the floor, ends beneath the floor. Save your strength, Wells advised, checking Grady's pulse, which was weak and fading. No need, Grady murmured. I've done my part. Preserve the legacy. His gaze shifted to something behind them. He's pleased. Jack turned, half expecting to see someone else in the chamber with them. There was no one, only the open wooden box containing the skeleton they'd discovered earlier. When he looked back, Grady was staring at him with surprising intensity. The seventh key, he whispered. What? Jack asked, leaning closer. My grandfather's final secret. Grady's voice was barely audible now. Not in the suitcases. In the walls. His hand feebly gestured toward the concrete wall behind them. Family legacy, Never ends, With those words, Edward Grady's eyes glazed over, his final breath escaping in a long, rattling sigh. Wells checked for a pulse, then shook his head. He's gone. Jack was staring at the wall Grady had indicated. Something about the concrete surface looked slightly different from the rest of the chamber, a variation in color perhaps, or texture. Wells, he said quietly, I think there's another hidden compartment. The detective followed his gaze, then nodded. Let's check it out. Using tools from Jack's demolition kit, they carefully examined the section of wall. Eventually, they found a seam, nearly invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. After several minutes of careful work, they managed to remove a concrete panel, revealing a small recess behind it. Inside was a metal box, roughly the size of a bread box, with a simple padlock. Should we open it? Jack asked. Wells hesitated, then nodded grimly. We need to know what we're dealing with. The lock was old, but still functional. Using bolt cutters from the construction equipment, they snapped it open. Wells lifted the lid slowly. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a collection of documents, property deeds, bank statements, and what appeared to be architectural plans for buildings throughout Miami. This is the real family legacy, Wells said, examining the papers. Look at these dates, 1940s, 1950s, all the way up to the present. Properties acquired after unfortunate accidents. Businesses purchased from owners who suffered mysterious deaths. Jack picked up one of the more recent documents, plans for a luxury condominium complex scheduled to begin construction next month, on a site where a suspicious fire had claimed 3 lives the previous year. 3 generations, Wells said quietly. 3 generations of carefully orchestrated murder and acquisition, building an empire on bodies buried beneath the foundations. He looked up at Jack, and it would have continued if your crew hadn't broken through that floor. Jack felt a chill run through him. Grady's son? Wells nodded grimly. We need to find him before he disappears. As they gathered the evidence, Jack noticed something else in the box. A small leather-bound book with no title. When he opened it, he found a list of names, dates, and locations going back decades. Each entry followed by a single word. Foundation. My God, he breathed, showing it to Wells. It's a ledger. Every Grady building in Miami has someone buried in its foundation. Wells took the book with gloved hands, his expression hardening. This stops now. As they climbed back up the ladder, Jack took one last look at the chamber below. The broken chandelier, Grady's body, the skeleton in its wooden box. 3 generations of a family bound by terrible secrets, preserved beneath the floor of a hotel that had never revealed its darkest mystery until now. Outside, the Miami sunset painted the sky blood red as police and ambulance lights flashed against the crumbling facade of the Palm View Hotel. Jack knew that long after the building was finally demolished, the shadows of what had happened there would remain in evidence rooms, in court testimonies, and in his own memories of what lay beneath the surface. 2 days after Edward Grady's death, Jack sat in Detective Wells' office at the Miami Police Department, reviewing architectural plans spread across the cluttered desk. The ledger they had found in the hidden compartment had led them to 17 properties throughout Miami, all owned by Grady Real Estate, all potentially containing human remains sealed within their foundations. The DA's office has expedited warrants for all of these locations, Wells explained, circling addresses on a city map. Ground-penetrating radar teams start tomorrow. Jack rubbed his tired eyes. He hadn't slept well since the discovery at the Palm View. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those chained suitcases waiting in the darkness beneath the floor. What about Grady's son? He asked. Any sign of him? Wells shook his head grimly. Robert Grady cleared out his penthouse and emptied several accounts before we could get to him. Airport security footage shows him boarding a private jet to the Cayman Islands the night his father died. He knew, Jack said. As soon as we found those suitcases, Edward must have warned him to be ready to run. We'll find him, Wells assured him, though his tone lacked conviction. Interpol's been notified. Jack wasn't so sure. The Grady family had spent 3 generations hiding their crimes in plain sight, accumulating wealth and power while Miami's elite walked unknowingly above their victims. Such people didn't disappear without contingency plans. As if reading his thoughts, Wells said, "The press conference is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Once this goes public, Robert Grady won't be able to show his face anywhere in the country." Jack nodded, though a nagging doubt persisted. Something about the whole situation still felt unresolved, as if they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. His phone buzzed, a text message from Diego at the demolition site. The police had finally released the scene, allowing the crew to resume work. Jack had assigned Diego to oversee the final stages while he assisted with the investigation. "I should get back to the site," Jack said, standing. "My guys are starting again today." Wells nodded. "Be careful out there. And Jack, this isn't your responsibility. You did the right thing bringing this to light, I know. Jack replied, though the words felt hollow. He had dreamed the previous night of standing in the lobby while the floor beneath his feet whispered with voices he couldn't quite understand. At the PAM view, the demolition was proceeding methodically. The area where they had discovered the suitcases had been thoroughly documented by crime scene technicians and was now being carefully dismantled under police supervision. Diego approached as Jack arrived, looking troubled. "Jack, there's something you should see." He led Jack to what had once been the hotel's basement level. The demolition had exposed part of the original foundation wall, and workers had uncovered something embedded in the concrete. "We found it this morning," Diego explained. "I was going to call the police, but I wanted you to see it first." Jack stared at the exposed section of wall. Partially embedded in the concrete was what appeared to be a small metal box, similar to the one they had found in the hidden chamber. "Don't touch anything," Jack ordered, pulling out his phone to call Wells before the detective arrived. Jack had the area cordoned off, and his workers moved to other sections of the site. Something about this discovery felt different. The box wasn't hidden behind a false wall, but actually embedded within the concrete itself, as if it had been placed there during the original construction. Wells arrived with a forensic team, and they carefully extracted the box from the wall. Unlike the previous one, this box had no lock, just a simple latch that had fused shut with age and exposure to moisture. Using specialized tools, the technicians managed to open it without damaging the contents. Inside was a single item, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but still intact. Wells carefully unfolded it, revealing a handwritten letter in now familiar handwriting. "To whoever finds this," he read aloud, "know that what you have discovered is merely the beginning. The PAM view is my masterpiece, but not my only creation. Throughout the city I have left my mark, in foundations, in walls, beneath floors, each building a vessel, each victim a cornerstone. My son continues my work even now, and his son will follow. The Grady name will be built into the very bones of Miami, and long after I am gone, our legacy will remain, hidden in plain sight. We are the architects of a new kind of immortality, not through art or literature, but through the very structures that define this growing city. Every Grady building holds a secret. Every foundation contains a sacrifice. As Miami rises, so too does our legend. Look for us in the shadows between floors, in the spaces behind walls. We are everywhere now, watching." Martin Grady, 1932. A heavy silence fell over the group as Wells finished reading. Jack felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead despite the Miami heat. "Jesus Christ," one of the technicians whispered. Wells carefully placed the letter in an evidence bag. "We need to expand our search. Every building connected to the Grady family, not just the ones in the ledger." Jack's mind was racing. The Grady Tower downtown, it was built in the 1960s, and the Pam View condominiums on the beach were completed just last year, both under Robert Grady's direct supervision, Wells noted grimly. "How many Grady properties are there in Miami?" "Dozens," Jack replied. "Maybe hundreds if you count partial ownership and subsidiary companies." The implications were staggering, a multi-generational killing spree disguised as a real estate empire, with victims buried within Miami's skyline, hidden behind walls and beneath floors throughout the city. As they emerged from the basement into the bright Florida sunlight, Jack's phone rang. The caller ID showed his home number. "Linda?" he answered, stepping away from the group. His wife's voice came through, sounding strained. "Jack, there's someone here. He says he's Robert Grady's assistant. He has documents for you to sign about the demolition contract." Jack felt his blood run cold. "Linda, listen to me. Don't let him in. Lock the doors and call 911 right now. I'm on my way." He turned to Wells, already running toward his truck. "Robert Grady sent someone to my house. My wife's there alone." Wells immediately called for backup as they both raced to their vehicles. The drive to Jack's suburban home was the longest 20 minutes of his life. Weaving through traffic with his hazard lights flashing, following Wells' police cruiser as it cleared a path with sirens blaring. When they arrived, 2 patrol cars were already at the scene. Jack's heart sank when he saw the front door standing open. He rushed inside, calling his wife's name. An officer intercepted him in the hallway. "Sir, we need you to stay back. We have a situation." "Where's my wife?" Jack demanded, trying to push past. Wells caught up and put a hand on his shoulder. "Jack, let them do their job." From the living room came the sound of a man's voice, calm, measured, unsettlingly familiar in its cadence, though Jack had never heard it before. "I simply wanted to meet the man who discovered my family's legacy," the voice was saying. "Is that so unreasonable?" Jack moved to the doorway and saw him, Robert Grady, son of Edward and grandson of Martin's son. He sat casually in Jack's armchair, dressed in an expensive suit, looking for all the world like a business executive stopping by for a friendly visit. Beside him on the sofa sat Linda, her face pale but composed. Two officers had their weapons drawn, while a negotiator was attempting to talk Robert into surrendering. "Ah, Mr. Harmon," Robert said, noticing Jack in the doorway. "Finally, I was having a lovely chat with your wife while waiting. You have a beautiful home. Let her go, Grady," Jack said, his voice steadier than he felt. Robert smiled, the same cold, calculated smile Jack had seen on Edward Grady's face. "No one's keeping her. Linda, dear, feel free to join your husband." Linda stood slowly and moved toward Jack, who pulled her protectively behind him. "You should have left it alone, Mr. Harmon," Robert continued conversationally. "Those suitcases weren't meant for you. The hotel would have been demolished, the floor removed intact as specified, and everything would have remained undisturbed. Why come here?" Wells asked from beside Jack. "You were safely out of the country." Robert's smile widened. "Detective Wells, how nice to meet you in person. To answer your question, family obligation. Surely you understand by now. The Grady legacy doesn't allow for loose ends." His hand moved slightly, revealing what he had been concealing beside him, a small detonator. "The foundation of your lovely home, Mr. Harmon," Robert said pleasantly, "was poured just last year during your renovation. Did you ever wonder why my father's company offered such a competitive bid for such a small residential project?" Jack felt Linda's grip tighten on his arm as the implication became clear. "Everybody out," Wells shouted, already pulling Jack and Linda toward the door. "Clear the house now." Officers began a swift evacuation as Robert remained seated, still smiling that terrible familiar smile. "You can't escape the foundation, Mr. Harmon," he called after them. "None of us can. It's in the walls now and the floors. My grandfather understood that, my father too. Buildings fall, but legacies remain." They had just reached the front yard when the explosion ripped through the house, the force of it knocking them to the ground. Jack covered Linda with his body as debris rained down around them. When the dust began to settle, Jack looked back at what remained of their home, now a smoking ruin with flames beginning to lick at the exposed wooden beams. Of Robert Grady, there was no sign. "He planned this," Wells said as emergency vehicles began to arrive. One final statement. Like grandfather, like father, like son. Jack held Linda close, watching firefighters battle the blaze. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. Before Jack could answer, Wells' phone rang. The detective listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grim. "What is it?" Jack asked when Wells hung up. "That was the forensic team at the Grady Tower downtown," Wells replied. "They found something in the basement foundation. Multiple sets of remains, all wrapped in plastic with dates marking when the concrete was poured." He paused, meeting Jack's eyes. "And they found building plans, detailed schematics for dozens of properties throughout Miami, each one marked with a small red X in the foundation or walls." Jack looked back at his burning home. Then at the Miami skyline visible in the distance, a forest of buildings, many bearing the Grady name, each one potentially hiding secrets in its very structure. "It's not over," he said quietly. "It's just beginning." 1 month after the explosion that destroyed his home, Jack sat in a temporary FBI command center established in a downtown Miami office building. What had begun as a local murder investigation had expanded into something far larger than anyone had anticipated. Based on the evidence recovered from the Grady properties, we're looking at potentially dozens of victims over a span of nearly 90 years. The FBI special agent in charge, Catherine Reyes, explained to the assembled task force. Maps and photographs covered the walls, red pins marking confirmed Grady buildings throughout Florida. Jack had been brought on as a consultant due to his construction expertise and his unwitting role in uncovering the case. Wells, now working jointly with the FBI, sat beside him, reviewing files on recently excavated sites. "The pattern is consistent," Wells noted. "Each major Grady construction project coincides with at least one missing persons case. The victims are selected based on a specific criteria, usually individuals with few local connections, often newcomers to Miami. They had help," Reyes added. "No family could carry this out for 3 generations without inside connections." She pointed to a board showing photographs of various individuals connected to the Grady family. "We've identified at least 5 longtime Grady employees who likely participated in the killings. 3 are deceased, 1 is in custody, and 1, Michael Prescott. Robert, Grady's personal assistant, remains at large." Jack studied the photograph of Prescott, a nondescript man in his 50s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. "What about Robert Grady?" Jack asked. Any trace of him? Reyes shook her head. Dental records confirmed the remains found in your house belonged to him. He had no intention of escaping. He wanted to become part of it, Wells said quietly, like his grandfather. The final piece of his own work. Jack suppressed a shudder. In the weeks since the explosion, he and Linda had been staying in a hotel under police protection. The insurance company was still processing their claim, complicated by the criminal investigation. Our lives had been appended in ways he could never have imagined when his crew first broke through that hotel lobby floor. We've established a pattern to the Grady constructions, another agent explained, approaching with a thick folder. It's not random. Look at this. He spread a large map across the table, showing the locations of all known Grady buildings across Miami. When connected, they formed a distinct geometric pattern. Some kind of symbol? Wells asked, studying the map. An architectural signature, Jack realized, recognizing the pattern from his years in construction. It's a modified version of the Vitruvian principles of sacred geometry. Certain measurements, angles, and distances that were believed to channel energy. The agents looked at him with renewed interest. Martin Grady wasn't just killing people and hiding bodies, Jack continued, the pieces falling into place. He was trying to reshape the entire city according to some twisted architectural vision. Each building is positioned precisely in relation to the others, and each one contains at least one victim, Reyes added grimly. Not just victims, Wells interjected, pulling out the journal they had found in the red suitcase. According to Martin Grady's writings, he considered them cornerstones, essential components of the structures themselves. The implications hung heavy in the air. Miami's skyline, parts of it anyway, had been designed as a massive, city-sized monument to murder, with victims entombed within its foundations. There's something else, Jack said, hesitating. He hadn't shared this with anyone, not even Linda. As we found those suitcases, I've been having dreams about the buildings. In the dreams, they're alive somehow, connected, like they're all parts of a single organism. He expected skepticism, but Wells nodded slowly. The night watchman at the Grady Tower reported something similar before we found the remains in the foundation. Said he could hear whispering in the walls. The psychological impact of learning about the murders, one of the agents suggested. Maybe, Wells allowed. Or maybe there's something more to it. Martin Grady wrote about creating something that transcended ordinary architecture. He believed he was imbuing his buildings with some kind of power. That's superstitious nonsense, Reyes said firmly. We're dealing with a family of serial killers, not supernatural architecture. Jack wasn't so sure. And something about the Palmview Hotel had felt wrong from the moment they discovered those suitcases, a sensation that couldn't be explained by simple psychological distress. The meeting continued with discussions of search strategies for the remaining Grady properties and efforts to locate Prescott. When it concluded, Jack found himself lingering over the map, studying the pattern of buildings. You really believe there's something to this? Wells asked, joining him. Jack traced the lines connecting the buildings. I don't know, but Martin Grady believed it. He spent his entire life building this ... whatever it is. And his son continued it, and his grandson after him. And they killed dozens of people to make it happen, Wells reminded him. That's what bothers me, Jack admitted. Why? What was so important about this pattern that it justified decades of murder? What did they think they were creating? Wells had no answer, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial, some underlying purpose to the Grady family's macabre architectural project. As he left the building that evening, Jack paused to look at the Miami skyline. The setting sun cast long shadows between the buildings, creating patterns of darkness and light across the city. For a brief, unsettling moment, he thought he could see it. The geometric design hidden within the seemingly random arrangement of structures. A secret blueprint laid over the city like an architect's transparent overlay. Then the moment passed, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the buildings were just buildings again. Concrete, steel, and glass. But somewhere within their walls and foundations, the Grady legacy remained a dark secret embedded in the very infrastructure of Miami itself. 3 days later, Jack received a call from Agent Reyes. The FBI had located Michael Prescott, Robert Grady's assistant, attempting to board a freight ship bound for South America at a small private dock in the Keys. He had a laptop with him, Reyes explained. Our tech team has been working on it, and they've found something you should see. At the FBI field office, Jack joined Wells and Reyes in a conference room where a tech specialist had set up Prescott's laptop. On the screen was a complex architectural program displaying a three-dimensional model of Miami. This is what Prescott was protecting, the specialist explained. It's a proprietary program developed specifically for the Grady family. It shows every building they've constructed or acquired over the past 90 years, along with planned future developments. He manipulated the model, zooming out to show the entire city. Each Grady property was highlighted in red, forming the pattern they had identified earlier. Here's where it gets interesting, the specialist continued, pressing a key that changed the display. The buildings began to pulse with light, sending out lines of energy that connected to other structures in the network, and the program is simulating some kind of energy flow between the buildings. Following the geometric pattern we identified, what kind of energy? Wells asked, frowning. The specialist shrugged. The program doesn't specify, but according to the notes embedded in the code, the pattern was designed to create what they called a resonance field across the city. Resonance with what? Jack asked, studying the pulsing network of buildings. That's the million-dollar question, Rhea said. Prescott isn't talking, but we found this in his personal files. She slid a document across the table. It was a letter dated 1926 addressed to Martin Grady from a professor at Miskatonic University. Jack had never heard of the institution. My dear Martin, Jack read aloud. Your theories regarding architectural resonance with telluric currents are fascinating, if unorthodox. Your proposal to create a city-wide geometric pattern to channel these energies is ambitious, but I must caution you against proceeding. The ancient texts you reference were not meant as literal blueprints. The sacrifices they describe were metaphorical, not actual human offerings. I fear you have misinterpreted these sources in a most dangerous way. Please reconsider your plans before you begin something that cannot be undone. Jack looked up from the letter. Telluric currents? That's a real thing, naturally occurring electric currents in the Earth's crust. But channeling them through buildings? That sounds like pseudoscience. Martin Grady believed it, Wells noted. Enough to kill for it. The tech specialist zoomed in on the model, focusing on downtown Miami. According to the simulation, the pattern is incomplete. There are gaps, places where Grady properties were planned but never built. Or haven't been built yet, Reyes added. We found blueprints for 6 more buildings, all in the final stages of permitting. Construction was scheduled to begin next month. Jack studied the model. The pulsing red network of buildings spread across Miami like a web. What happens if the pattern is completed? No one had an answer, but the question hung in the air, unsettling in its implications. Prescott kept detailed records, Reyes continued, according to his notes. The Grady family believed that completing the pattern would create a kind of architectural machine, a city-sized device that would channel and amplify these telluric energies for some purpose. What purpose? Wells asked. Reyes hesitated. That's where it gets strange. The notes reference something called the Awakening, apparently the culmination of the Grady project. But there are no specifics about what exactly would be awakened. Jack felt a chill run through him, remembering the sensation he'd had at the Palm View Hotel, that feeling of being watched by the building itself. There's one more thing, the tech specialist said, typing a command that changed the display again. The program includes a timeline. According to this, the pattern needs to be completed by a specific date, April 17th, 2026. That's 7 months from now. Why that date? Jack asked. Something about astronomical alignment, the specialist replied. The notes mention a conjunction of celestial bodies that only occurs once every 97 years. So we have 7 months to figure out what the Gradys were trying to do. Wells summarized and make sure it doesn't happen. As Jack left the FBI office that evening, he couldn't shake the image of that pulsing network of buildings, a hidden pattern woven into the fabric of Miami, designed for some purpose they still didn't understand. The Grady family had spent 3 generations and countless lives creating it, driven by a vision that went beyond ordinary madness into something far more disturbing. What were they trying to awaken, and what would happen if they succeeded? 6 months later, Jack stood on the balcony of his newly built home, looking out at the Miami skyline illuminated against the night sky. After much deliberation, he and Linda had decided to rebuild rather than move away, a decision that had surprised many, including Wells. You sure about this? The detective had asked when Jack told him their plans. After everything that happened, Jack hadn't been able to explain it fully, even to himself. Something kept him tied to Miami, to this case, to the mystery that still hadn't been completely solved. The FBI had dismantled the Grady network as best they could. The remaining Grady properties had been seized, the planned constructions halted, the company's assets frozen pending the outcome of what had become one of the largest serial murder investigations in American history. Michael Prescott had eventually begun cooperating with authorities in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. His testimony had implicated dozens of accomplices throughout Miami's construction industry, city government and police department, people who had helped cover up the Grady family's activities for decades. But despite all they had learned, Jack still felt they were missing something crucial. The Grady pattern remained incomplete, its purpose unclear. What had 3 generations of killers been working toward? What was supposed to happen when the final buildings were completed? The ringing of his phone interrupted his thoughts. It was Wells. "Jack, we've got a problem," the detective said without preamble. "Someone broke into the evidence storage facility last night. They took the red suitcase and Martin Grady's journal." Jack felt his blood run cold. "How is that possible? That facility is supposed to be secure." "Inside job," Wells replied grimly. "One of the evidence technicians disappeared along with the items. Turns out he's the grandson of one of Martin Grady's original associates. The network is still active," Jack realized. "They're still trying to complete the pattern." "That's not all," Wells continued. "There's been activity at one of the seized construction sites. Someone's been there at night, continuing the work in secret." Jack looked out at the city skyline at the buildings he now knew formed part of a vast, hidden design. "Which site?" "The Bayfront Tower. It's the most crucial point in the pattern according to Prescott's model. If completed, it would connect all the other nodes in the network." "I'm on my way," Jack said, already moving inside to grab his keys. Linda was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. After all they'd been through, there were no secrets between them anymore. "The case?" she asked quietly. Jack nodded. "I have to go." She approached, placing a hand on his cheek. "Be careful. Remember what we talked about. This isn't just your responsibility." He covered her hand with his own. "I know, but I need to see this through." The drive to the Bayfront construction site took 30 minutes through evening traffic. When Jack arrived, Wells was waiting with several FBI agents, including Reyes. The half-completed tower loomed above them, its exposed skeletal framework silhouetted against the night sky. "We've got movement on the 10th floor, Reyes informed him. "Thermal imaging shows 3 individuals. SWAT is preparing to move in." "Let me go with them," Jack said. "I know construction sites better than any of your agents." Reyes hesitated, then nodded. "Vest up. But you stay behind the tactical team." Equipped with a bulletproof vest and radio, Jack joined the SWAT team as they silently made their way up the emergency stairwell. The tower was dark except for occasional work lights casting long shadows across unfinished floors. On the 10th floor, they paused at the stairwell door. Through the small window, Jack could see movement, figures working by the light of portable lamps, mixing concrete and preparing to pour it into a specific section of flooring. The SWAT team leader gave the signal, and they burst through the door, weapons raised, shouting commands. 2 of the figures immediately surrendered, dropping to their knees with hands raised. But the third, an older man Jack recognized as the missing evidence technician, stood calmly beside what appeared to be a makeshift altar constructed at the exact center of the floor. On it sat the red suitcase, open to reveal Martin Grady's journal. "You're too late," the man said, smiling serenely as officers approached him. "The cornerstone is already in place." Jack moved forward, looking at what the man had been working on. In the center of the unfinished floor was a small depression in the concrete, and within it, partially embedded, was a human hand, severed, preserved, and positioned with the fingers splayed in a specific pattern. "My own contribution," the technician said proudly as officers cuffed him, just as Martin Grady gave his hand to the Pamview Foundation. "A piece of myself to complete the circuit." Jack felt nauseated but forced himself to look closer at the journal lying open on the makeshift altar. The page displayed a diagram of Miami with the Grady buildings marked, forming a pattern that he now recognized as a modified version of an ancient symbol he had seen in some of the research materials, a symbol associated with summoning or awakening. "What were you trying to do?" Jack asked the man as officers began to lead him away. "What's supposed to happen when the pattern is complete?" The technician looked back, his eyes alight with fervor. "The city becomes the key, the buildings become the gate, and what has slept beneath Miami for centuries will finally awaken." "What will awaken?" Jack pressed. The man smiled. "Look beneath the surface, Mr. Harmon. It's always been there, waiting. In the foundations, in the walls, in the spaces between floors. The Gradys didn't create it, they merely built the mechanism to release it." As the SWAT team escorted the prisoners down to waiting vehicles, Jack remained on the 10th floor with Wells and Reyes, staring at the grotesque offering embedded in the concrete. "We need to demolish this building," Jack said firmly, "and maybe others in the network too. Break the pattern permanently." Reyes shook her head. "That's not a decision I can make. These properties are worth billions, and they're tied up in legal proceedings now. It would take court orders, environmental impact studies, We don't have time for that," Jack insisted. "That date at Prescott's program identified, April 17th, 2026, is less than a month away, Jack." Wells said carefully, "I understand your concern, but we've stopped them. The pattern won't be completed." Whatever they believed would happen, it can't happen now. Jack wasn't so sure. Looking out through the unfinished walls of the tower, he could see other Grady buildings scattered throughout Miami, each one positioned according to a design conceived nearly a century ago by a murderous visionary, each one containing human remains within its foundation, each one a part of something larger, something still not fully understood. As dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows between the buildings, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they had only interrupted the Grady legacy, not ended it. The pattern remained embedded in Miami's architecture, waiting, and beneath the surface of the city, in foundations and walls, in the spaces between floors, something waited with it.